An accidental nuclear attack would escalate into full nuclear war, killing billions of people. Only a policy of disarmament can prevent nuclear war. 40198. The direct toll that would result from an accidental nuclear attack of the type described above would dwarf all prior accidents in history. Furthermore, such an attack, even if accidental, might prompt a retaliatory response, resulting in an all-out nuclear exchange. This would result in billions of direct and indirect casualties worldwide. The only way to make certain that an accidental or any other nuclear attack never occurs is through the elimination of all nuclear weapons. The potential benefits of comprehensive disarmament are so attractive relative to the attendant risk that increased attention is now warranted. Next, you should reject nuclear weapons even if deterrence might prevent wars. Ideals of deterrence operate under assumptions that legitimize the Showa Japanese internment in Vietnam by using people as means to some policy end. This tyranny of survival is self-defeating of the goals nuclear weapons were created to protect, only serving to leave us in a life not worth living. Callahan in 73. Excessive emphasis on survival, casting aside other human needs and values in the process, can severely jeopardize survival. Nuclear weapons can be seen as a great symbol of that thesis. A viable human ethic of survival must encompass all other values and goals human beings seek and prize. Otherwise, it would either be self-defeating or productive of a life in which most people would not find worth living. In the name of survival, all manners of social and political evils have been committed against the rights of individuals, including the right to life. For all these reasons, it's possible to counterpoise over against the need for a survival of tyranny of survival. There seems to be no imaginable evil which some group is not willing to inflict on another for the sake of survival, no rights, liberties, or dignities which is not ready to suppress. It is directed even at legitimate concern for survival when that concern is allowed to reach an intensity which would ignore, suppress, or destroy other fundamental human rights and values. The potential tyranny of survival is capable of wiping out all other values. Survival can become an obsession and disease, provoking a destructive single-mindedness that will stop at nothing. An accidental nuclear attack would escalate to full nuclear war, killing billions of people. Only a policy determined to prevent nuclear war. 498. The direct toll that result from an accidental nuclear attack was the type described below, would dwarf all prior accidents. Furthermore, such an attack, even the active of the retaliatory response, resulting in all-out nuclear exchange. This results in billions of direct and indirect crashes worldwide. The only way to make certain that an accidental or any other nuclear attack never occurs is through the elimination of all nuclear weapons. The potential benefits of comprehensive disarmament are so attractive relative to the attendant risk that increased attention is now warranted. Next, you should reject nuclear weapons, even if deterrence might prevent wars. Ideas of deterrence operate under assumptions that legitimize the Showa Japanese internment in Vietnam by using people as a means to some policy. And the tyranny of survival, self-defeating of the goals, nuclear weapons were created to protect, only serving to leave us in a life not worth living. Callahan is 73. Accepting this survival, casting aside other human needs and values in the process, because really jeopardize survival. Nuclear weapons considered as graceful as these is a viable human ethic of survival because all the values and goals that human beings seek and prize. Otherwise, it either be self-defeating or productive in life which most people not find worth living. In the name of survival, all manners of social political evils have been committed against the rights of individuals, including the right to life. For these reasons, it's impossible to counterpoise over against the need for survival of serious survival. There seems to be no imaginable evil which some group is not willing to inflict on another for the sake of survival. No rights, liberties, dignity which is not ready to suppress. It's direct even at a legitimate concern for survival when that concern is allowed to reach an intensity which would ignore, suppress, or destroy other fundamental human rights. The potential theory of survival is capable of wiping out all its values. Survival can become an exception to disease and fucking and destructive single-mindedness that will stop at nothing.
Observation 1, inherency. A. The testimony of victims reflects the grim reality of sanctions. Simmons 96. I look at the girl beside me at school, and I imagine she's my dead friend sitting right next to me. I can't believe that my friends are dead. The whole thing was real. In front of my parents, I try to act as if I'm cheerful. But deep inside, I'm very sad. I dream the dreams are all about corpses. When I pass my dead friend's house, I can't look. It's the sight of the corpse I remember. Why doesn't God come for me the way he came for them? I should be finished with this life. I dreamed I saw a burnt man with black scars on his stomach and saw the image of a woman all crumbled, all burned. A child called Zaid said, I want to ask you a question. Could you please tell me when the sanctions will be lifted? We have no food. We have no water. We have to ask for water because the brawls of water is not drinkable. And when we took the children to the hospital, they said you could take them where you like. It's not up to us. So when will all this be over? Just tell me when. Because yesterday, our last ration of flour was consumed. There is no relief. B. Russia will veto any efforts to lift UN sanctions except for unconditional removal. This is Los Angeles Times, 2001. An American-British effort to revise the UN sanctions had a withdrawn and face threatened by veto by Russia and the Security Council. Ordinary Iraqis continue to suffer under economic sanctions. But the Iraqis are uninterested in modification and compromise interest in unconditional ends of sanctions. Russia will bulk all its together restrictions and import all military as well as civilian purposes. The century of the current sanctions are continued at least until the end of this year. C. Sanctions have accomplished nothing. Saddam is more secure and millions of citizens will continue to die. This is Walton, 2001. Saddam Hussein is the enemy of 3 successive U.S. presidents. He has proclaimed that the years of the UN sanctions accomplished, well, Iraqi dictator is more secure than a decade ago. And about 1 million Iraqi citizens, most of them young children, have perished of malnutrition and disease. Step into the children's hospital in Baghdad. There are no enemies here, just losers. 22 million Iraqi citizens continue to die. Because you want to hear and see the testimony of victims who correct the grim reality of sanctions. Civil 96. I look at the girl beside me at school, and she's my dear friend sitting right next to me. I couldn't believe my friends today is holding for my friends. I tried to exit on trip, but deep inside I was dreaming the dreams about corpses. But I prepare my dear friends, I can't look inside the corpses. I mean, all the corpses. Why does the God government the way he kept the should be pinned to the sun? I dream of burn man, black shirts, stomach girl, image of woman, all corporate, all burn, I talk about cause man. I talk cause they say, I don't crush, because he's telling me when sanctions live, we have no food, we have no water, we have asked water, because bronze water is not drinkable. And when you choose the house to this, you can check where you like, sounds so all these people just tell me when because yesterday I laughed for so there's nobody. The Russia will veto any efforts the U.S. States have unconditional removal. Since the South African does run a major bridge rise, the U.S. States have withdrawn with threat veto by Russian security council. Other than Iraq is under economic and policy, but Iraq is on entry the modification compromise and unconditional remains of Russia will not back back to the restriction import of military civilian persons. Current will continue to the end of this year. C6 have a common sense have a common justice. Sudan is more secure and millions of citizens will continue to die. This is what 2001 Zelensky is the enemy of 3 successive U.S. president. I have proclaimed that after 10 years of the U.S. sector compass, but the Iraqi dictator is more secure than a decade ago. About million citizens, most of them young children have perished by nutrition, and substitute the children back, hospital beds that don't enemies here. This doctor who could easily be cured, and not for these sanctions.
We shall continue with observation 2, the harms of the status quo. U.S. sanctions are waging a silent genocide on Iraq. Thousands die a month from disease and malnutrition while the U.S. reveals its economic superiority. This is from Walt in 2001. This is about sanctions. This is not about Saddam Hussein, although American politicians and many ordinary Americans argue that it is he who is responsible for the death and misery caused by most outraged sanctions in history. Saddam, to be true, will have to answer to history and his own people from his actions over decades. But it is the United States, nations with the United States as a driving force that established the economic blockade that for a decade has led to the death of more than 1 million people, most of them children under the age of 5, and suffering of many kinds of much better than death. We cannot account and be responsible for what Saddam has done. We are responsible and accountable for what we have done as the United States. Not only were military targets destroyed, but civilian installations as well as water purification and sewage treatment plants, electrician plants, even hospitals, schools, and mosques were destroyed. It continues. We cannot know if Iraq is trying to build a stock of weapons of mass destruction, but balanced against what might be is the knowledge of what it is. The use of weapons of mass destruction by the United Nations, which is to say largely the United States. Can anyone seriously argue that sanctions are any less weapons of mass destruction than nuclear, chemical, or biological weapons? Iraqi said that they understand the distinction between the United States and the American people, but I don't think that we can wiggle off the moral hook that easily. We continue with observation 2, the harms of the status quo. U.S. sanctions are waging a silent genocide on Iraq. Thousands die a month from disease, malnutrition, while the U.S. reveals in the economic superiority. This comes from Wall in 2001. This is about sanctions. This is not about Saddam Hussein, though American politicians and many ordinary Americans argue that he is responsible for the death and misery caused by most miserable sanctions in history. Saddam, to be true, would have to be answered to history and his own people from actions over the decades, but in the United Nations, with the United States as driving force that's established an economic blockade that for a decade has led to death of more than 1 million people, most of them children under the age of 5 and suffering from many kinds of better than death. We are not responsible for accountable or for what Saddam has done. We are responsible and accountable for what the U.S. has done. Not only were the military targets destroyed, but civilian installations as well as water purification and things solid as sewage treatment plants, electricity plants, even hospitals, schools, and mosques. It continues. We cannot know if Iraq is trying to build a stock of weapons of mass destruction, but balanced against what might be knowledge of what it is, the weapons of mass destruction by the United Nations, which is to say that largely by the United States. Can anyone seriously argue that the sanctions are of any other less of destruction of the weapons of mass destruction, which are chemical, nuclear, biological? Iraqi said that they understand the distinction between the U.S. government and the American people, but I don't think we can wriggle off the moral hook that easily.